Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me for this training session in our Third Place Youth Ministry. I hope this will be encouraging for you and also give you some things to work on as you begin to engage with our students this school year. So I'm going to do this in two parts. Part one, we're going to talk about sort of some vision things as well as our structure for our programming. And then in part two, we're going to talk a little bit about some counseling things and why I think it's important that you, as even a volunteer youth leader, are prepared for some of the conversations that you very well could have with the students that you'll be leading this school year. So let me begin by talking a little bit about the vision of our youth ministry. I think it's important that we remember the philosophy of why we do the things that we do, and then we'll talk about how we want to implement some of these things in our program this year. So our church vision statement is together strengthening you to change your world for Christ. And so the question that we want to ask when we think about Third Place and its application of this is, how do we effectively strengthen teens and children as well across all student ministry to change their world for Christ? How are we doing this in our teens' lives in particular? And how can our influence on students extend beyond the program, right, the things that we do here on campus, and into life-on-life application? Are we able to partner with parents, families to foster spiritual growth at home? These are all the kinds of questions that we want to ask. And when we think about this, the most important thing that we're implementing here is that Third Place as a youth ministry is based on the principle of discipleship. And that can sometimes be a spiritual buzzword, a church, Christianese kind of language. So let's unpack that a little bit. And I think one of the key things at least, is that we're not only seeking to introduce teenagers to Jesus, we're also wanting to help them go deeper in their understanding of the gospel and then become proactive in living out their faith. All right, so when we're doing discipleship, we're doing a couple of things. We're personally investing in our students. That is, we're giving them of ourselves, right? Of our time, of our abilities, of our wisdom and experiences. We're pouring into the lives of students. We're also interacting with parents. Something that I think is very important is that you would, over the course of the school year, get to know the families surrounding your students in your small group. And as we interact with parents and learn backstory and struggles and interests and things like that, we're going to have greater investment into the lives of our students. Discipleship requires us to be prayerful for our students, regularly praying through and encouraging our students in prayer and asking the Lord to work in their hearts. Because again, the work that we're doing is not just something that our hands, our brains, our hearts are fully in charge of, right? We're relying on the Spirit of the Lord to work the change, to grow the fruit as we water and as we plant, okay? We're also training in discipleship our students to be leaders of their peers. We're seeking to implement and encourage them in their lives to put into practice these things in such a way that they're going to encourage others. They're going to bring other peers along with them as they grow in their faith. So discipleship in Third Place is accomplished through the Bible teaching that we do. Everything in our youth program centers around teaching the Word of God and seeking to implement the Word of God in our lives. We do discipleship through you as a leader being personally invested in a small group of students along with your small group partners, just making relationships and trying to reach the individual students within our group. I'm reminded very often that I'm one person and we have a good sized staff that's helping us out all together, right? But there are so many students there on a Thursday night. It's impossible for me to connect with all of them. And so in order for us to do discipleship well, this relational ministry where we're investing in our students, we need you to be fully invested, right? And reaching out and building relationships and loving the students that are under your care. So leader investment is a key thing in discipleship. And then service opportunities are key things in what we do. I think the life on life, that is, we do things together, we serve together, we do fellowship types of things together, and we see the fruit in each other's lives. We see how we respond, how we speak, how we act. And service opportunities are an incredible opportunity for us to disciple our teens, and that's a big deal for us. So when we think about strengthening students and the importance of helping them to own their faith, live it out, disciple them to the next level, we have to be reminded that Third Place as a youth program is not just a teen hangout. While we love to have students filling up our gym or in our COVID environment, hanging out in our parking lot and on our baseball field, we want to recognize that that's not all that there is to it. We want to definitely give them the atmosphere where they can develop godly, pure relationships, but it's not just a teen hangout. Also, I've used the word program and programming already, but Third Place is not just a program. It's not just here because we think that as a church we have to have something for teenagers, right? It's not just about the fun events that we do, all right? We can use the word program loosely, and I'm certainly not killing the word, but we need to be reminded that it's a personal discipleship ministry that we are engaging in the lives of teenagers. It's not just something to fill space, to give them extra things to do on their calendar. And lastly, we don't want to think of our program as a leadership team as a type of spiritual childcare, spiritual daycare that happens at nighttime for teenagers, right? It's our goal to be helping our students to grow in their relationship with Jesus and put those things into practice outside of youth group time. So there's a partnership with parents, but we're not just here to foster good spiritual conversations and then send them home and disconnect and things like that. We're doing so much more than just entertaining, than just cultivating good, pure relationships. There's a whole host of things that go into this. Let's talk a little bit about how we want to think about the program, again, implementing this strategy of discipleship, and how we want to see ourselves influencing these teenagers that are under our care. So I'm going to give you 3 purposes for Third Place as it pertains to teenagers, and let's unpack these just briefly in our time together. So the purpose of Third Place as it pertains to teenagers, number 1, is to lead teenage students to exalt Jesus Christ and to love others as Christ has loved us. And we draw this in our name, Third Place, from Mark chapter 12, verse 30, where Jesus is challenged on what the greatest commandment is, right? And he responds so succinctly as only the wisdom of God can do. He says in verse 30, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." And so that's why we say that we want to train and encourage these students to exalt and love Jesus Christ above all others. But there's that second component, which is to love our neighbor as ourselves, because Jesus ties the second commandment in verse 31 to the first commandment in verse 30. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And so he sums up all the law and the prophets in that, right? That we love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we love our neighbor as ourselves. And we can't separate those two things. And so we're encouraging our students to exalt Jesus Christ and love him above all else, but then in that same breath to love their peers as Christ would love us, right? We seek to implement this by our Bible teaching, again, by our leader investment, by our youth group structures like small groups that are going to expand on our conversation, and again, through service opportunities. Our ability to live out the love your neighbor as yourself principle and the worship God in your work, worship God in what you're doing and what you're saying every moment. That's how we want to see these teenage students grow in that area. That's number 1. Number 2 is to disciple teenage students to passionate, healthy, and personal relationships with Jesus Christ. We have a lot of churched teenagers in our youth group here at Fellowship Bible Church, which is a great thing. That means they've grown up with Bible foundation, they've grown up with Bible principles. We have a ton of work and groundwork that's already been done. But we need to encourage these students to take the next step, which is to say, I'm not a Christian because I go to church. I'm not a Christian because this is what my parents do. I'm a Christian because I love Jesus with all my heart, and I'm passionate about growing in that relationship, and I want to have a personal relationship with Jesus, not by extension because of my parents, because of my pastor. And that's not something that we can necessarily teach. We can tell them that that's the value, but that's something we have to model. That's something we have to do side by side, and it's something that we're going to do long term. It's not something that we're going to see achieved in just 1 year of youth ministry. So this is an ongoing thing. Number 3, we want to equip our teenage students to reach and disciple their peers and develop vital personal ministries in their communities. Again, the vision statement of Fellowship Bible Church is strengthening you to change your world for Christ. And the idea of changing your world bears with it this idea that the world is an enormous place. So we need to shrink it down to our circles of influence and recognize who are the people in my life, what are the abilities that I have been given, what are my connections, how can I use these things that are at my disposal to grow, to minister, to develop that kind of mentality. So we're helping students to understand that, number one, they have a role in and a love for the body of Jesus Christ, that is the church. So another huge reason why we place emphasis on serving in our youth group is because we see teenagers not as the future of the church, but as the church, as a component in the church, as a vital part of our church. And so we're helping them to understand that they have a role now, and that their ability to serve is part of living out the vision of our church. We're also training students as peer leaders and servants to one another. We want our students to really embrace the idea that they, as they take ownership of their faith, have the ability to then encourage others to do the same thing, to bring alongside other peers who want to love Jesus too, and to have that kind of sideways influence to be peer leaders and to serve one another. That's our purpose of Third Place as it pertains to teens, leading teenagers to exalt Jesus Christ and love others as Christ has loved us, discipling teenage students to passionate, healthy, and personal relationships with Christ, and equipping them to reach and disciple their own peers and develop vital personal ministries in their communities. Let's talk a little bit about the purpose of Third Place as it pertains to parents. And I understand that many of you who are watching this video have a teenager or maybe more in our youth program, and you have also stepped into the role of being a youth leader. And so this might not be new to you, but I think it's important that as a team we understand this dynamic, that as it pertains to parents, our purpose as a youth ministry is to assist and partner with parents in training up their children in the way that they should go. Deuteronomy 4:9, Moses reiterating the law to the nation of Israel as they're about to go into the promised land, tells them, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. All right. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so as a youth ministry, our goal is to have a hand-off, back-and-forth, dynamic relationship with parents. We're here to help parents raise up their children the way that they should go. And it's very important that as we partner with them, we are shattering that facade, that false sense of that our world kind of has, or that Christendom kind of has, that it's the teachers and pastors who are professionals who are responsible for the spiritual maturity of children and teenagers. Parents are the ones that the Bible charges to be doing that primary work. And so we want to supplement. We recognize that not every parent is going to be on board with that. Not every parent is going to be very spiritual. And so even just the fact that they might drag their teenager to youth group gives us the opportunity to supplement, to help. But we need to think about how we're partnering with parents, how we're meeting them where they are, and ministering also to parents even at the same time as we minister to teenagers. That's why we're going to provide, and this is on me, but also for you as a volunteer, to provide parents with resources, with counseling assistance, with loving support, with prayerful support. You have an enormous ability to encourage the parents of the students that are going to be in your small group this year, simply by praying for them, simply by connecting with them, simply by asking them how things are and what's going on at home, so that you're aware, and so that you're able to both help them and encourage them, as well as to speak into the lives of their teens. We're also seeking to encourage the students that are under our care on the path of obedience and trust when it comes to their relationship with their parents. One of the biggest things, one of the most common things we'll always deal with as a youth ministry is teenagers complaining about their parents, teenagers not recognizing their parents as the God-given authority that they're to have. You and I were teenagers once. We remember being there, right? And so we have this great opportunity to help students grow to trust their parents, to grow to see them as the God-given authority that's been over their life, placed over their life divinely for the purpose of raising them and instructing them in the way that they should go. And so you and I are always going to be, as it were, on the parent's side. We're trying to support the leaders in our students' lives and help them to see how they want to submit themselves to their parents' leadership and honor them in the choices that they're making. So more on that as we go on. But that's our purpose as it pertains to parents, assisting them with training up their children in the way they should go, providing parents with support, resources, counseling assistance, and etc. And also encouraging the students that are under our care that they need to be walking on the path of obedience and trust. And really briefly, before I dive into some of the practical ins and outs, the purpose of Third Place as it pertains to our church family. So we talked about students, parents and our church. Now we're going to talk about our church family for a moment. Our goals are to train teenage students to understand that they are part of the body of Christ. Again, they are not the future of the church, they are the church. At least they're a component of the church, as you and I are as well. And so we need to help them understand that if they are disconnected, the body's going to hurt, right? And they're also going to be disconnected from the life-giving resources that are there that God has commissioned his body to do. So we're training them to understand their part in the body of Christ. We're also training them to, to serve as peer leaders and and servants now. But we're also helping to train them into adult leaders, because they will one day be the future of the church leadership. And that's where we need to understand that we're preparing them for something more in the future. So we need to do now the work of helping them grow in their love for the church, see themselves as a vital component of the church, and see the church as a necessity for their spiritual growth. All that by way of our vision. Let's talk a little bit about how we want to implement our strategy. So just a brief note here in our 2020 training video that we are dealing with COVID-19 in an ongoing way, which means that all of the things that we're doing are, we have plan A, plan B, plan C, part 1, and so on and so forth, right? And so the things that we do this year are going to be subject to change, subject to flexibility. But essentially, we have 3 potential plans in place for our current staffing needs. We're going to plan to continue in the best possible scenario to do our regular ministry of meeting once a week, Thursdays from 7 to 9, engaging in small groups, engaging in regular monthly activities, all those kinds of things when the world is normal and equal. In the event that we are unable to maintain that because either our headcount has to go down or restrictions are increased because the numbers of COVID-19 are increasing in our area, we'll have to adapt to that. We do have a plan in place that if we have to go back into lockdown, we will be on Zoom. We'll continue to do these things, and I'll be communicating all that stuff with you in a real-time kind of environment. But as of right now, our plan is to continue meeting outside through the end of September, possibly into October if the weather will permit us to do that. You've been part of probably already of our program moving inside to the gymnasium with a social distance setup with chairs kind of spread out and things like that, where we have to wear masks during game time and that kind of thing. And so we'll implement these strategies according to the precautions and orders that are given down to us. Just a quick note, we do encourage as a church family in all of our different ministries, everyone to be wearing masks as they come into our building. We see that as a loving your neighbor kind of initiative where we are trying to care for one another. That's not us saying that, it's just a way that we want to care for one another. And so it's important that we see the leadership wearing masks around the building. And of course, you're welcome to remove it for worship, for teaching, for small group conversation. I'm a big proponent of body language, and you lose half your body language when your mask is covering your face. And so communication is a key thing that we want to foster. And the mask can be a problem for that, but we want to love each other well and ensure that we're able to continue meeting even with restrictions. So students are also going to be wearing masks when they're playing games, moving around the building, but again, the same precautions that we have in place for a Sunday morning will remain in effect. All that being said, our plan is to have our staff, that is you volunteer staff, to arrive for prayer time somewhere between 6:45 and 7. I would love for us to maintain that discipline of praying for our students on every youth group night. If you're able to be there, that would be wonderful. If not, we totally understand that sometimes we're eating our dinner as we're driving on the way over to the church. So if you can be there for that 10-minute window just to pray for our students, that would be a wonderful thing. We're going to open with game types of things, activities, get to know you things at 7 o'clock. We have the team worship band warming up around the same time. They're currently meeting around 5, so some of you are actually here even earlier. But as we go from there, we do our announcements, we do our worship time from around 7:30 to 8. And then from 8 to about 8:30, I'm trying to be very concise in my time, although you know that I tend to go over. We have a teaching time there, and then a recap window of about 10 to 15 minutes on the other side of that. So small groups, when we start in the month of October, will be meeting on those opposing teaching nights, which we'll break that down in just a moment. And then we'll close with some open gym time, maybe an organized game, often a service project if we have the ability to do those things. And then on a bi-monthly basis, I'm holding a parents meeting in the foyer, just a touch base kind of deal, hear prayer requests, share some ideas, and keep them informed on what's going on in our youth program. So that's happening from about 8:45 to 9 while there's open gym time happening. Students are welcome to hang out during that time. So our discipleship program, our discipleship-based program, centers on this small groups idea. And I've hinted at this already, but there's only one of me, and there's like 50 students that come on a Thursday night, sometimes even more than that. And so that's where it's important that we have you as a youth leader involved and invested in the lives of these students. So what we're doing is if you're new to our program, we have our students broken up into junior high, which is 7th and 8th grade, and then senior high, which is 9th through 12th grade. We have a number of small groups that take those two larger groups and then break them down into smaller components. So junior high, once we launch in October with our small group rotation, they're going to get their teaching nights on 1st and 3rd Thursdays. And then they'll get their small group nights on the opposing 2nd and 4th Thursdays. And so senior high will rotate with them. They'll get their teaching nights on 2nd and 4th Thursdays, and then they'll have their small group nights on 1st and 3rd. Both will get their recap time immediately after their lesson time. What's important about the recap time, I'll unpack that a little more in a moment, is just this capitalizing while or maybe a better metaphor is striking while the anvil is hot kind of deal. We're going to take immediately what we just talked about, maybe put some application to it, maybe take some notes as a leader, and think about how I can be praying for this particular student as they're seeking to apply what they've just learned. That also gives you a weekly touch point with your students versus an every other week touch point with your students, because now I'm meeting with them every week, even though the recap time is only for about 10 to 15 minutes on the backside of the lesson time. Okay, so recap in general, again, it happens immediately following the teaching, and what we're asking for are points of application, and we're covering prayer requests. So immediately after lesson time, what we've been doing while we've been having sort of a larger group teaching time for the month of September is just saying, let me get two girls groups and 2 guys groups, kind of break up that way. Leaders can disperse themselves, and sort of doing the same thing. But what we'll do in October is I'm going to encourage you to get with your own small group, which you've received your breakdown of students there. And so you'll get with that group of students for that 10 to 15 minute period and just do the same thing that we've been doing. But we'll ask 3 questions. What's one thing new that you learned, or what's one thing that stood out to you in the lesson? What's one thing you need to apply? And how can we be praying for you this week? And sometimes those first 2 questions bleed together, and that's okay. But I'm essentially looking to get them talking about, oh, that was interesting, that stood out to me, I hadn't heard that story before. And then, well, you know what, this is the thing that really stood out to me as the thing I need to work on this week. And maybe that's the prayer request, and I think that maybe we as leaders, if you can do sort of some of that detective work as they're sharing a little bit about what they're learning, what they're trying to apply, instead of like waiting for a prayer request about grandma, maybe you can just say, well, I'm going to pray for you this week that you're going to grow in your patience as you seek to apply that in your relationship with your parents, something of that nature. The purpose of recap is simply to maintain that regular weekly contact with your students. It's to draw specific points of application for them from the lesson. It's to facilitate ongoing interaction over prayer requests. Again, sometimes we take down the prayer request on a scrap piece of paper and then we forget all about them, or maybe we pray about them once and then we forget to follow up. And so the consistency of having that will help us, I think, as a leadership team, be able to continuously engage over the needs and challenges that our students are facing. We also want to use recap time to eliminate the need to review the lesson during the regular small group time. So in other words, if you during your recap time are talking about the lesson in a more general, here's some things that were interesting kind of way, the next week when you follow up with the more detailed small group time, one of the things we want to move away from is asking them, well, what was last week's lesson about? And sort of putting them on the defensive right away, oh, I got to remember what that was. Rather, we're going to prime the pump with some discussion questions, which we'll go into in a moment. But we're kind of facilitating by the recap time the ability to just dive right into the content, dive right into discussion on the small group nights. The recap gives you the ability to do the lesson discussion immediately, all right? And then you're also given the ability during recap to continue to take notes on your students' responses so you can intentionally follow up with them on the areas where they need to grow. As far as the structure of your small group is concerned, I organize them based on age, gender, grade, school district, and relationships. Right now, the structure of our group, it's basically just grade and gender. Those are the big dividing lines, with some exceptions in there. The small group time that you're going to be given starting in the month of October is that 45-minute window of lesson time and the recap time. So you get that 45 minutes to devote your time to talking about the discussion questions that I will be supplying for you every week, and also reviewing the Quiet Time Journal, which I will talk more about this in a few moments. This is last year's Quiet Time Journal. The one for this year is being printed as we speak, but we'll talk more about this, and this is going to be a key tool for you as you engage in your small group time. I would suggest something like the following time management for your small group. I think it's important to budget the time for transitioning from worship and moving your group to the location where you'll be having your small group. 5 minutes there of about catch-up time, following up with what happened last week, getting situated, organizing yourselves, small talk. That's actually a vital component to what you're doing as a small group leader. If you're in such a hurry to get to the lesson, the discussion, and the recap and all that kind of stuff, you miss the opportunity to build relationship with them and hear about their lives. So I would encourage you, find a way to strategically and time efficiently engage with them in small talk and what's going on and what they're watching and what's interesting to them. That's valuable in building a relationship with them. I'd encourage you to take about 20 minutes to discuss the weekly review page in the Quiet Time Journal. This will also include your prayer request time. And so this is last year's journal, but the format for the weekly review page is the same. Essentially, they've got their memory verse here on this page from the week that it would be a good thing to go over that as a small group. Bible memory is a discipline that we don't nearly encourage enough, and so this will provide us the opportunity to start working on that. There's a prayer request section. There's things about what do they need to pray about this week, and then at the bottom they have a section that says list 3 things from your quiet time this week that were meaningful to you that you'd be willing to share in small groups tonight. So in other words, what I want them to be doing is going through the week, and then when they hit Thursday, they've got this review page. They're going to take a few minutes at the end of their quiet time that morning to write down some thoughts. And then when you guys go into small groups, you open to this page and just say, hey, share with me something that was meaningful from your quiet time. And that won't be a totally out of left field, disconnected kind of conversation, because the readings in this year's journal are tied directly to the lesson series that we've been doing. So it's actually going to give you the starting point to be able to dive into a brief little review and the discussion questions that I'm going to be giving you, because it's all tied together in the same type of theme, okay? So take about 20 minutes to do that. That's kind of the meat and potatoes of what you're going to do. And then you have still about a 10-minute window to do discussion questions, about 5 minutes to close in prayer, and then come back to the gym. So what I've done with your discussion questions, again, I'll give those to you each week. You'll actually have them the week before your small group. So I'll have them ready during the lesson time for you to have in front of you to make notes, however you want to process that. And then you can be prepared to lead those questions the next week along with the journal in your small group time. I've structured those to start broad to go deep. So if you think about it like a funnel, I even have that diagram on your small groups. There's a big question at the top that anybody can engage with, whether they're spiritually mature or not. This is an opinion question. This is maybe it's even a silly question just to kind of get some emotion into there, but it's relevant to the conversation. As you start here, and you go a little bit more specific, and you might start to identify in that question some people that are going to have some better answers, some more on-point answers, and the people who are more willing to talk. And then the last question is going to always involve some type of looking at their Bibles. So they will need their Bibles with them in small groups or access to it on their phone. And so what we'll do there is have them look at a passage of scripture and then answer a question or two about that. So we're kind of going broad to go narrow, to go deeper, all right? So I would encourage you as a small group leader, you're going to learn pretty quickly which students are responsive, which students are on board with you in the course of the conversation, which ones are going to be your strong ones in the group. And in that, you may want to take the questions that I give you and alter them a little bit. Think about which questions would be more applicable to your students, or which student would I think, I want to actually direct this question at this student because I know they're going to want to share an opinion on that. That's totally up to you as a small group leader to customize that, to add maybe your own questions to it, which is fine, or take away a question because you think they're not going to connect with that at all. That's great. I love that as you guys are developing relationships with your students, that you'll have a greater insight than even I will into how they're growing and what they're going to be responsive to. So I think a couple of quick things just as reminders, and then we'll kind of wrap this session up. Don't recap the lesson in your small group time, and don't ask the question, what did we learn last week? Again, if you want them to engage with you, then don't put them on the defensive with the quiz in the beginning of your small group time. Rather, provide them with some thoughts. Hey, here's what we talked about last week in 30 seconds or less. Here's just a quick review. Let's think about this and dive into your discussion question. Right? You're going to get much better and much more consistent engagement if you aren't constantly putting them in a position where they have to rack their brains after they've not thought about this in 6 days to come back and give you the answer that you're looking for. Also, learn to curtail excessive prayer requests by implementing some type of prayer request group, text group, instant message group, some way that you're going to communicate with them outside of that time. If you already know what the prayer requests are, and if you have that venue to be able to share those things as a group, that's going to give you a ton of time to be able to just pray for what the needs are, remind everybody what the needs are in your prayer request time. And let me just encourage you, because you're going to have a copy of this yourself, take lots of notes on your students in this book, and be engaged with this book yourself, because that's going to be how you stay consistent with them and begin to grow in the same areas that maybe you're even hoping to see them grow to. As far as your structure for your small group goes, you're partnered with one other person at this point. I'd love to get to the point in our team where we have 3 leaders in each group. Sometimes that's a little overkill based on the size of the group, but it gives you flexibility, it gives you support, and it gives you the ability that if you aren't able to be there on a given night for some reason, you know that the bases are covered. I would encourage you to designate, and this role can rotate based on the week or based on how you guys want to do this, but one person to kind of lead the conversation each Thursday night and one person to be the support person. You could consider that the lead facilitator and the assistant, lead and support, however you want to think about that. But one person who's going to drive the conversation forward and one person who's going to support, who's going to supply some thoughts if kids are climbing up for the night, or who maybe is going to be your crowd control in a slightly larger group that tends to be more distracted. And again, that role can rotate on a given week. That's totally fine, and that's up to you guys. As a matter of fact, maybe you want to have your partner lead the recap time after lessons, that they take the helm there, and then you take the helm on the larger small group nights on the opposing weeks. That's one way to think about doing that. I'd also encourage you to be in communication with each other, be in communication with your partner, and maybe even meet once, a couple of times per quarter or something like that, outside of youth group time, to just talk about students, to pray for students, and to plan ahead as you want to lead your small group time. Think also about how you can be involved with your students outside of that youth group time, and that's a great way to plan that. I'd encourage you as a small group team to plan at least one event for your small group. That could be as simple as a movie and game night at your house or something like that, where you're just going to have some time outside of youth group to be able to engage with them, where there's maybe a little less structure to it, and you just have the ability to get to know them. So be thinking about that and be working on a plan with your partner in that. Lastly, it's very important that you put the necessary preparation time into your small group conversation before Thursday night. Again, communicating is critical. Who's going to be leading? Who's doing what things in your group? But be prayerfully considering your students and how you want to tailor the conversation to where they are. I'd encourage you to reread the notes. I'll give notes from the lesson to you as well. Reread the text that we were studying, because the Spirit will continue to give you insights into how He wants you to lead that conversation with your students that week. It's not acceptable, and this should be obvious, but I know sometimes life gets in the way. It should not be acceptable for us to come in on a Thursday night and just wing it, look at the questions for the first time 2 minutes before you go into the small group, and then just trust that something good is going to happen. God can use anything to accomplish his purposes, but we want to be aware of doing our best to be prepared in order to most effectively lead our students that way. Your investment in our students is again, it's such a critical thing that we need to see happen in order for our group to be successful. So just be engaged, an engaging presence with them on Thursday nights. I know we play lots of dumb games. I know that they're often high energy games. I know that we don't play a lot of messy games, but occasionally we play messy games. I don't expect you to do all the games, but I do expect you to be with the students, to be with them on the sidelines, cheering them on if they're playing some kind of sport, or just laughing with them, taking pictures. We love to fill up our Instagram and Facebook for Third Place with things that are going on, as that's kind of just an exciting thing to do. And you as leaders engaging with them and just being excited with them is a big deal. Sit with them during the teaching time. I know we have sort of we set up 40 chairs and then we just fill in with extra chairs based on who comes. But grab a spot with your students. Sit with them during the lesson time. That's a great way to just be with them, for them to see you with your Bible open. To just appreciate what's going on together. You're going to build relationship that way by being with them, and look for teachable moments during the hangout time. I've said this to you before, and I'll say it again. The most poignant discipleship moments happen not during the small group time. They're expecting you to disciple them during that time. But when you come alongside them during a game time and just ask them what's going on and give them a word of advice in something, or challenge them on their language in the middle of something, like that life on life stuff is where real discipleship happens. So be present with them, be engaged with them. Be with the students each week. I know that it's easy to say, okay, it's not a small group night, I'm not gonna be there tonight. Let me challenge you. Make Thursday night just an open window for you to be engaged with students. I know things come up. I love to be as flexible as I can be with you guys because I understand how life happens. But make every effort to be present with the students on Thursday night, even when it's not the small group night, because your consistency is going to build the team mentality, and your consistency communicates to the students that you're trustworthy. When they see somebody in and out each week, like they're not there but they're here then and that, that doesn't jive well. Teenagers are incredibly adept at sniffing out someone who's not committed, and they're not going to trust them. All right, and so it's critical that you put as much time aside as you can to be engaged with your students. And with that, be engaging with them outside of youth group time, maybe on a weekly basis. If you can text them, if you can message them directly, maybe once a week, maybe every other week or something like that, just giving them the sense that you are truly caring about them in and out of every day, of every week, is going to go a long way in helping them understand that you're there for them and that you're serious about them. All right, so let's pause there. We'll conclude that session and we'll come back for just one more session. I want to talk to you in that one about some counseling things, because there are lots of conversations that will come up in your small group time and in your interaction with students that could require some additional conversation. So thank you for watching this first video in our training materials. I hope it's encouraging to you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to having the next conversation with you in session 2.